Well, welcome everyone. Good afternoon. As we are getting signed in and getting started, we wanted to give everyone a chance to navigate to the polling page. So if you go to pollev.com/SOTS549, you'll be able to participate in this question and several others that we have throughout the call today. So it's great to see all of the names. So I think I recognize all the names, but for those that don't know me, I'm Stephanie Otts. I'm the director of the National Sea Grant Law Center. And with Karen Bareford, we have been facilitating the all hands calls for the Water Resources Vision team. Karen, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hello, everyone. My name is Karen Bareford, and I am working with Sea Grant on water resources issues. And good to see everybody. Thanks.
Thanks. So just probably wait another 30 seconds to see if anyone else has a critical water issue that you're focused on right now that you would like to include in the poll. And later on in the call, Karen and I will talk a little more about some of our thoughts for what we can do with the information that you share, not just during the all hands calls now where we use polling, but in the webinars that we'll be talking about. Okay. All right. Well, I think we can go ahead and get started. I can get it to advance. Okay. So our agenda for today, we wanted to take a little bit of time at the beginning to talk about the webinar series. We want to share some feedback that we've received from participants in the webinars and also get your feedback if you've participated in them and what we should be thinking about moving forward. Then we have just very brief updates, no details regarding some of the recent competitions and also potential opportunities that might be coming our way, just to lead into a bit of a discussion about planning for the future all hands calls. So there's really just two main topics, the webinars and planning for future calls, and we'll have a little bit of a transition in the middle. Just a reminder to anyone who might be new to the all hands calls, this is the group that we kind of have informally as our team leadership to try to help us keep everything on track. So feel free to reach out to any of these folks at any time if you have questions or are curious about what we've been doing. We have a call coming up probably near the end of the month, and some of what we talk about here today will go into those conversations. So just a quick reminder of the webinar series goals. So this is the first time that we've done webinars, right? And our thoughts for this first year is that this is really intended for an internal audience of the National Sea Grant Office and also the wider Sea Grant network. We were not really envisioning these initial webinars to be for an external audience, so the general public, other scientists. This is really about trying to raise the visibility of water resources programming within the Sea Grant network and to highlight innovative or interesting activities that are happening, as well as encouraging networking and cross collaboration or cross program collaboration, and to provide opportunities to inform planning efforts. And so these kind of goals and objectives have informed a little bit about how the webinars have been framed, who's been invited to speak, those type of issues. So our second webinar was on emerging contaminants at the end of May. We had 67 participants That was only a few less than we had in our first webinar on COVID in January. And so I thought that was really positive that our participation stayed at about the same level. So, and we had a lot of repeat customers, or participants. There were 28 Sea Grant programs represented and the National Sea Grant Office, and you can see the range of presenters and panelists that we had. After each webinar, we send around an evaluation survey to the participants, and we just wanted to share some of the general feedback we get. We haven't gotten like overwhelming responses to our survey, so keep in mind that the actual responses are pretty low compared to the almost 70 participants that we had. But with respect to the content, the majority of participants did say that the content was very informative or somewhat informative. And at least nobody said it was barely informative at all. So that's good. Then we're also curious, not just about, is it informative, but is it relevant?
Say that again.
Sorry, just muting a few folks. And, is it relevant to your future work, right? And here again, most participants said that it was very applicable. We did have one person that said it was barely applicable. And so I would be curious maybe if that person doesn't generally work on emerging contaminants, or maybe was just attending to learn more and they're not sure how it might work with that. And then we also wanted to know whether the webinars are helping increase interest in engaging with another Sea Grant program on this topic or with the Water Resources Network. And so again, those responses, were positive, with 6 saying, likely to increase or may increase. All right, so I should have given a little warning. So as a first step, we know that not all of the participants on the all hands calls may have been able to attend one of the first 2 webinars, but if you were able to attend, we would be interested to hear whether the webinars are serving your needs. Okay, Karen, it looks like the movement might be slowing down a little bit, so maybe we'll wait another 30 seconds. Great. Well, this is good. It's good to know that, that they're informative, somewhat informative. That gives us room to talk more about how we can improve and, make things better. But it looks like the majority of participants on the call today would like to see them continue, which is great to hear. Karen, did you get a screenshot?
I got it. Thank you.
Okay, great. We're going to go to the next one. So this is just a chance. This might take a little longer to answer. Obviously, if you have been able to attend one of the webinars, did you have a favorite part? Thanks, everyone. So the answers are slowing down a bit. So we'll give another 15, 20 seconds in case anyone is typing. I should also mention, if you are having trouble with poll everywhere for any reason, you're absolutely welcome to answer the question in the chat box, and we will work to capture that as well. Okay, great, thanks. So we just have another open-ended question. Thinking now kind of about what you might have liked to have seen was different or improvement that we could make for the future. Well, Karen, we stumped everybody.
I think this is a good stump.
Yeah. Oh yeah, they were just writing longer answers. Great.
Some of these answers, Stephanie, make me wonder if how open people might be to the webinars being a little bit longer. And if you guys want to answer that in the chat, we'll call that information as well. Right now, we've been targeting for them to certainly not go over an hour and a half, but actually trying to keep them more like an hour and 15 minutes. But if you have any thoughts on whether maybe longer webinars might be needed for some of this stuff, we'd be welcome to hear those thoughts.
Yeah. We definitely ran out of time for Q&A on the first one on COVID. Yeah. Okay, well, 10-second warning to finish typing if anybody was in progress, and then we'll move on. It's great to see all of the feedback and the ideas. Okay, so one thing that the planning committees for the webinars have talked about, and I'll let Karen jump in here if I've missed anything, is, and one of the thoughts was to make it, kind of relevant or useful to the wider network. We've talked about whether it would be worth it to take the time to try to produce a document or something after each webinar that summarizes the webinar, pulls the information together, and maybe helps to continue the conversation. And so Karen has developed a potential template for a 2-page executive summary that the leadership team has been looking at, but it could also be expanded into a slightly larger document that would include the copy of the slides and all of the polling results, maybe some points of contact for programs that are working on these issues. After the most recent webinar, we experimented with capturing the Q&As and putting that out with the recording of the webinar and different things. So Karen, before going to the next slide, did you have anything to add on this?
No, I think that you summarized it very well. Again, it would just, in essence, we'd have 2 different products. One would be the standalone, and then the second would be a larger that had all of the extra attachments and those sorts of things. that's really it. I mean, you did a great job. Thanks.
That's good. Yeah. And I would just tell the group, like, we're about to go into another poll about this. And, really, it's something that we have wanted to do, but haven't been able to do to date yet, because as we all are overwhelmed by a million different projects and kind of having limited capacity. And so with the next slide, we would love your honest feedback about whether a webinar summary as described would be beneficial. And we're talking about the internal network, right? The webinars are internal. A document would be for that same audience.
Stephanie, as people are weighing in, we've got this uncertainty kind of being the leading feeling here. And so I'm wondering if maybe seeing one of these might help people. So if maybe we want to do a test run from the emerging contaminants webinar. And if you like that idea, please, again, answer in the chat and just give us a little bit more feedback, and that will help us to decide how to move forward.
And don't feel bad if you were C. I think we're all kind of trying to figure this out as well. And so, yeah. Good. Well, great. Well, I think, Karen, if you get a screenshot, then we can move on.
We're good to go. Thank you.
Good. Okay. Then just, update on where we are. So we have so we had proposed to do a minimum of 3 in 2021. So we're on track with that. If we could get a 4th one in, we might consider that. But there's a lot going on this fall with omnibus preparation and everything else. But we do have a group that has been meeting to talk about the next webinar, which would be on stormwater, green infrastructure. There's the names of the team members who have been helping with those conversations. We were looking for late August, maybe early September for this webinar. Like with emerging contaminants, this is obviously a huge topic. The challenge is really trying to figure out, how could you do a high level kind of intro to start the conversation around this. If this is something that you're interested in, you are welcome to join our team. Just let Karen and I know that you'd like to be included. We're in the process of scheduling the next series of calls for that. And then we also want your input on future webinars and like what we might consider doing, for a 4th webinar in 2021 or continuing into 2022 if there's interest. And so those who have been participating in the calls for a while, you may remember, I think it was 2 calls ago, we did a bit of polling and brainstorming for potential ideas. And so the next poll, these were the, I guess, second grouping of topics that were like after COVID, emerging contaminants, and the stormwater one. So these topics had already kind of come up in the conversation, and we were looking for some feedback. Oh, that was fast. Like interest, which ones maybe could move forward with this. We are not necessarily, these are not set in stone, right? So if you are filling out the ranking and you're like, man, I wish another topic was on this list, please put it in the chat so we can capture that.
If anybody's having issues here, you just want to kind of click on the different boxes in the Poll Everywhere web link, and you can actually vote them up or down, and that's how you can do the ranking. And I think you can actually drag them with your, if you're on your cell phone.
Great. Well, maybe we'll wait just a little more. I saw a couple of chats come in about topics, which is great. And actually, Karen, this result will transition very nicely into some of our later conversations. So, okay, if you want to get a screenshot.
Got it. Thank you.
And I also want to take a moment to thank everyone. It's a small group. If you have questions, you're welcome to come off of mute and ask it. I know we do a lot of talking and the interactions with the polls, but we don't want to stifle questions or comments. Kind of starting to think ahead for the wider water resources vision team, we wanted to just give an update on the National Sea Grant Office water competitions. We, know not everybody in the network might have realized how much was going on. I actually had forgotten about one. So there were 3 notices of funding opportunity released by the national office in 2021. There was one on emerging contaminants, one on mitigating runoff, and then water equity. Those competitions are complete. The applicants have been notified, but the results are not public yet. So successful applicants are kind of embargoed from talking about it. You may have heard some things through the grapevine, but Karen and I were hoping that more information might be available and we could talk a little more freely about it, but we're not quite there yet. But we would welcome thoughts and ideas on how the water resources team can and should engage with the successful applicants. There's several of these that involve scoping. There's a lot of members on the team that might have interest or just want to kind of stay aware maybe of what those projects are. And it's kind of new territory for us as a vision team. To have this amount of activity going on. So you can share in the chat, or if afterwards something comes to you, you can email Karen and I or anytime. And as I mentioned about the upcoming leadership team call, I think this will probably be one of the kind of topics of conversation as well. So Kathy had a question. So water resilience. Oh yeah, that was back to the webinar, right? Water resilience. So just to address the comments in the chat, I don't know what we meant by water resilience. It's sort of like we didn't know what we meant by green infrastructure or emerging contaminants. And so it could be what the group wanted to be. It might, for that one, if that is picked for the next topic, we might need to do some scoping before the planning committee is formed or trying to figure out the best way to do that. But it could be infrastructure if that makes sense.
And just to add, the ideas that we posed there were things that had been upvoted on our last call, which I believe was in February. And so it is really open. It's one of those things that is the eye of the beholder in a lot of ways. So depending on maybe even the team that agrees to help lead that can kind of decide where we want the emphasis to go.
And speaking of resilience, so hold those thoughts. I wanted to just mention to start thinking about resilience, water resilience. the water equity competition, also related to climate and water resilience. And there may be opportunities coming in the future. And Karen and I kind of wanted to toss out what we've heard and get the water resources team thinking about if there's ways that this network can help either individual members or programs kind of position to do this. So in an email that John Pennock, the National Sea Grant Office Director, sent in June, there was a $35 million request from NOAA to increase resilience to natural hazards and changing conditions. There also was announced today that the current House appropriation bill had a $10 million line for the Sea Grant Resilient Coast Initiative. If you're not familiar with that phrase, it was a Sea Grant Association white paper that was developed back in 2020. I'm happy to share that with anyone if you haven't seen it, or you can ask your directors about it. But I actually, it's very broad for resilience. So obviously these are general resilience. It could be hazards, it could be climate, but there's water resilience potentially in there. Obviously we don't know yet. We don't know how much is going to be appropriated, how much might be available to programs, how the national office might send out this money if it becomes available. But Karen and I had been thinking that if there was interest from the Water Resources Vision team to, try to brainstorm, to have a better sense of the work around resilience, that we would be happy to facilitate those calls. Yes, and I got a private chat. If anybody wants to see the white paper, I can send it out after the call. Just send me a chat. Okay, and yeah, and I see John Bellata's comment, so you can also hold that thought because we have a question coming up kind of about that. Okay, all right. So that brings us to the second half of what we wanted to discuss. We don't have as many polls for this, so again, feel free to I don't know if I'll see raised hands, but you can come off of mute. So we want to engage in a conversation about planning for future all hands calls. So the next one, if we stick to the similar schedule, would be in October. On one of our previous calls, when we had some polling, one of the things that rose to the top that members wanted to do was learning from successful cross-program grant collaborations. So again, this kind of relates to, there might be resilience opportunities. They might have to be multi-program. How might we be prepared to engage in those type of proposal development? And there's also, we would like to get some ideas for future all hands calls, right, beyond October. So the first part is, okay, if we want to focus in October on cross-program work and the challenges of those type of grant proposals, Karen and I wanted to kind of start by just saying, who can we learn from? Who do you think has been good at that, right? But we didn't want to use poll everywhere and kind of make it feel like we were calling programs out or it was some sort of competition. So we thought that if you have an idea of a program that you think maybe we could invite them to present in October or talk about their experience, please private chat to Karen or myself, it doesn't matter who you use, about your recommendation or point of contact. Karen, did I explain that correct?
Yes, definitely. And again, what we're going to use this information for is that we'll reach out to some of these people and try to get them to work with us in developing the next all hands call, so that we can, kind of learn from some of these people, maybe put together some BMPs or something. But we really want to find out from you who you think has done this well, so that we can, try to pull from them directly. And we'll also include, we intend to try and reach out to the national office and pull them into this as well.
Yeah, and the reason for reaching out to the national office is maybe to get some of their, maybe guidance about, what they would be looking for, in what they think maybe makes a successful proposal, or things to keep in mind from kind of that perspective.
So one idea I had on this is several of our Sea Grant directors are also Water Resource Institute directors. And I know Darren at one point tried to coordinate efforts between Water Resource Institutes and Sea Grant programs, and trying to get some of those going. And he did regional workshops around the country. I would think that that might mesh into this topic area somehow.
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, maybe that could, Darren or somebody else that was involved in that could kind of share some of their takeaways from that project too.
So Stephanie, this was me, just a Susan White, direct follow-up for that specific effort. I'd be happy to chat more if that's of interest, that cross Water Institute and Sea Grant structured discussion. But I see Mary, I think, is on here, and maybe she is glued in too. So if there's the interest in that, I'm happy to do that.
Thanks, Susan. I was typing as fast as I could, and then I decided I would stop and just say it verbally. We have some summary outcomes, slides and content from all of those workshops that Darren led, that I'm sure could share. We've presented them in for other groups and for the NOAA and USGS water mission area leadership. So if you would like me to explore that, I could do that and provide as much or as little as you're interested in.
Thanks, Mary. Okay, so folks can keep typing away in the chat. This is great. Wanted to go on just because it's related to a lot of the comments I'm seeing in the chat. And so I think a lot of us were on the same page about, what might be preferences for the all hands meeting, other topics. And this one might be really hard to rank. Obviously, like I personally would be interested in all of these, but we can't do everything at once. So that was like the only thing. But we also wanted to do this polling to share kind of our initial ideas and to give participants on the call today a chance to share in the chat if you have other ideas, other topics that you would like to see. Now, as you're doing the rankings, with the caveat that we don't know who these folks are, and so we obviously have not reached out, and we don't know whether they would be interested or what the timing with something like this would be. So this is a theoretical poll right now.
And to clarify too, the new Sea Grant liaisons, if you'll recall, I think last I'd heard we were supposed to get information back in mid-June about who those awards went to, which still hasn't come out. However, if we want to include them into this process and what those 3 positions will be focusing on, that's what is referenced under the new Sea Grant liaisons.
Okay, well, seems to be slowing down a bit. So Karen, if you want to take a screenshot.
Okay, Steph, we're good to go.
Good. And I probably should have mentioned this in the beginning. We are recording the webinar. The way that we have done it in the past is that when I send the email to let everyone know that the recording is available to watch, we include a link to a survey that has these polling questions so that anybody who is watching the video can answer the questions as we go along. After our first all hands call, some people did that. No one did that on the second call. So we're going to try it again after this call to see if it continues to be a way to get engagement for people who couldn't come today. But that might be something we revisit if it turns out it's not useful to people. Oop. Okay, well, turns out I was really worried about time, but we really did that well. So I think I'm going to stop my share and we have time for discussion. And so there's been a lot of comments in the chat that we might want to come back to, or other members just might have things that they want to share about these all hands calls, things that we should keep in mind if we're planning for the next one. Stop talking. Sylvain?
Hi, Stephanie. You were asking earlier what this group might be able to do, and when we're talking about resilience, and it seems like through the budget process, there will be a push for doing more resilience. And it might be nice if we could conceive some models for accomplishing resilience objectives that might be alternatives to a bunch of spring competitions that we would not necessarily, this group would not have the authority to implement such a model, but might have some ideas, some original ideas about what the national office could do, and just pass those along as an alternative. Those competitions, in my mind, are not always the best way to achieve the goals of the program, and maybe the intended goals that make their way through the appropriations language.
Great, thanks, Sylvain. No, that's a great suggestion. And I haven't looked at the Resilient Coast white paper in a while, but I think there was kind of different, that also wasn't conceived as a bunch of spring competitions. So there may be something that we could build off of there.
But I think there's also other topics that made made it to the appropriations language that were not necessarily envisioned as national competitions, that were handled by the national office as national competitions.
Okay. Oh, yes, that's an important point. Yeah.
And Lacey, I hate to put you on the spot, but I thought I understood at one point that the way that the last few NOFOs came out with this idea of doing a scoping and then doing a research competition component to it was also something that I thought we might be seeing again in the future. Do you know if that's the case, or can you speak to that?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. I'm not actually sure, but it does kind of seem like something that like, it doesn't surprise me just by the way folks talk about you know, sort of the purpose of the National Sea Grant Office, and how we do need to well, just the network and the program in general. I think that it seems like it kind of feeds the purpose, but maybe these things are also more like pilots. And so depending on what happens with them, maybe the next ones in that particular category would not be the same format. So maybe when it's a new topic, that's kind of like where you dive in and see what practices really work. So maybe it depends on what kinds of, if new topics come out that need some research, maybe then we would see the same format. But if we're diving deeper into, say, green infrastructure, maybe then, we would look at what came out of that one and then look for an opportunity to fund, more exploratory research into the method that worked or something, But I'd be happy to ask around about that too.
Yeah. Thanks, Lacey. Yeah, and maybe that gets also like back to Sylvain, like this group, given, we could debrief a little bit maybe about the experience trying to put together those type of proposals, different models maybe that we as a network might like to just present for consideration to the national office for moving forward.
Well, I guess if I were to elaborate a little bit more, the Resilient Coast white paper specifically talked about two different kinds of needs, right? Some capacity and some programs. So bringing new programs without new capacity would not necessarily be useful, because we're kind of the individual programs are kind of plateauing at capacity, and there's only so much that we can ask people to do more with. So that was one way to approach an issue and a topic, and this group might be able to again brainstorm some ideas as to how it might be helpful to move things forward.
Thanks. I also just uploaded, don't hold me to it, but I'm pretty sure that's the final version of the Resilience Coast white paper. So if anyone on the call was interested in looking at that, you can take a look. But Karen, I think that's good. I think that's something that we can kind of put on the agenda, between calls to try to facilitate some more thinking and brainstorming about that. Okay. Well, yeah, so I think the floor is open. I do not mind giving people 10 minutes back in their day. But if anyone, at all on the call has thoughts that they would like to share about what we've talked about, or has questions about the water resources team in general, we're open. Okay. All right. Well, I want to thank everyone for joining us today. As I mentioned, you are welcome to reach out to Karen and I at any time. Karen has a new email though. Karen, I don't know if you want to mention that in case people are emailing your old email. So, yeah.
Well, hopefully if you do by accident send anything to the old NOAA.gov email address, you'll get an automatic response. But my new email address is actually at kjbearford@UA, as in University of Alabama.edu. And yeah, please send stuff there. My understanding is that NOAA account is going to be shut off here fairly quickly, so I don't know that you'll continue to get bounce backs. But I think on the last slide we have the updated email as well, Stephanie.
Oh, okay, right. Yeah, and so probably by tomorrow morning, we'll have the recording posted on our website along with the slides. If I can get it out tomorrow, I'll send an email with that information and the link to the poll questions. And stay tuned for more information about the group. And our next webinar too, later this year. Well, thanks everyone. Have a great rest of the day.